This is now lecture 3 in elementary Greek with Foundation Baptist College. We're using Plummer and Merkel's elementary Greek, and we're working through section by section to come to a good understanding of how to work with these words for the purpose of reading the biblical text and ultimately to the glory of God. What we've talked about in previous times were initially the alphabet, and we worked through just understanding how to write the alphabet. And we even did a little bit of a theology of some of the significance of working with the alphabet. And then the last time together, we talked about feminine endings and how to work with feminine nouns. And so we talked about this specific noun, agape, and just worked through the endings. I strongly encouraged that you memorize this chart. In fact, this chart right here it's just critical for your success as a Greek student. I am excluding in that, I should say, the secondary set or the alpha endings because you can derive those. And so what I just recommended is aes, aein, ion, is, os, and having it cold solidly in your mind so that you would be prepared at any point to use it and eventually to get quick enough with it that you can do that without effort. We're adding to that now an additional 2 sets of endings. So the plan in this lecture is to move from just the feminine, or what gets called the first declension, and to add to that now the second declension, which is going to include masculine and neuter nouns. Okay, now in order to get there though, I do want to back up a little bit and do a slightly better job, or just dig in a little deeper with our understanding of nouns and how they can be configured. I talked about last time the simple fact that English nouns are pretty basic. We have, in general, just 2 ways of configuring our nouns. So we can do egg and eggs. Egg is, of course, the singular, and eggs is the plural. And so we only have those 2 options. We've recognized, or we discussed a little bit as well, that there are a few places where English will allow us to have what is actually a case system. So he versus him, or I versus me. And even in that case, we don't just have the subject and the object, but we actually also have possessives. So we have I, me, and my. And we also have he, him, and his. So there are, it turns out, other ways to configure English nouns. But in Greek, what we ought to talk about would be 3 different parameters, 3 different ways that a Greek noun can be configured. And those three parameters are going to be the one we've already talked about here, number. Number is going to be singular versus plural. And so you recognize on that, I've just got 2 options. So times 2 on all of the Greek nouns. But we could also talk about, for Greek nouns, the concept of case. And that was what we talked about last time. Hopefully you remember the cases. Whether you remember the titles or not, that can come with time. But the cases are nominative. Nominative nouns are going to function as subjects. Okay, so along with this, I do want to give a little review for translation purposes. You're reading along in a Greek sentence and you encounter a noun, something in the form agape. Okay, and I've so far just used this one noun so that we can get used to it. Well, you look at this noun and you recognize it as a nominative case noun. And so based on that, mentally, and eventually it just comes with time, you learn to recognize that as the subject of the sentence. And when we're moving from one language to another, we're moving from Greek into English. Greek can have a very different word order. The subject might be at the end of the sentence. English, the subject basically needs to be in front of the verb. So when you translate across, you'll just grab this noun and you'll stick it in front of the verb. Why did you do that? You recognized it as a nominative. Nominatives go right in front of the verbs and we're set. Okay, so our first case is nominative. Our second option is the genitive. And the genitive, I said last time, was possession. I didn't give a very good explanation of how that would actually be translated in real life. So let's do that now. If I'm walking about and I see a genitive noun, something now I'm talking about in the case, or the form, agapes. Okay, I look at the ending, or I converse, or on the other hand, I could go plural. Remember, I've got 2 different configurations I could do here. So I could find this as a plural, agapon. How would I render that? Or how would I translate it? And for our purposes right now, I'm just going to say that I'll put an English word here so we can actually see kind of how this works. If this was something like the purpose, and then agapes, I just need you to translate for now with this key word. You're going to put in the word of. That's your keyword. Okay, so your simple rule for translation with a genitive, when you encounter a genitive, any form of a genitive, for now, as we go on, we learn some richness to this. But for now, you stick an English of in front, followed by the normal noun. Okay, and so this would be the purpose of love. Or if I'm going with the plural, the purpose of loves. Stick an of in front and move on. Okay, we'll give some more examples of that in a bit as we get additional practice. Okay, so we have the nominative, we have the genitive, we also have a dative. And the dative, to use the same kind of analysis that I did before, if I happen to come across something in the form that was agape, and it has this iota subscript as the key, that's the marker of the dative. Or if I was in the plural, I would be looking at ice, agapis. If I came along and I saw something of this form, insert this keyword. Your keyword or words to insert will be the words to or for. Okay, if someone asks, how do I know which one? Just try them. Try the to, try the for, and context makes up the difference. The one that makes more sense, for now, go for that one. Okay, so I really just need to memorize in order to know how to handle these cases or how to create meaning from the cases. I need to look at a genitive, insert the word of. For a dative, I insert the words to or for. And finally, we come down to our last, and that's the accusative. Your accusative is going to mark the direct object. And in order to render that into English, fairly simply, I'll just put it after the verb. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be directly or immediately after the verb, though that's probably a good place to start. And so if I saw something of the form, as we've worked through here already a couple of times, something agapein or agapas, those endings, that would be the plural. If I saw something of that form, the direct object form goes, we put the subject, we put the verb, and then we ask what. Okay, and so God gave what? God gave love. Okay, and love as the direct object because it's accusative. That's how we would proceed. Okay, putting all those together then, what I've got so far are two parameters that a noun can appear in. A noun can appear in either in number, so parameters would be singular versus plural, or a noun can appear in multiple cases, which would be nominative, genitive, dative, or accusative. And then my final parameter is one I want to sink into for a second or two, and that's the subject of gender. Here our options are masculine, feminine, and neuter. Okay, so a little discussion here because English speakers aren't accustomed to it. We don't have anything like it. And so for an English-speaking second language acquirer, a person trying to study Greek, or actually quite a few languages that have grammatical gender, it can be a little confusing. Okay, as soon as I say gender, then of course, naturally, you are going to associate it with what you experience in the real world in terms of gender. And so some kind of, well, I say masculine, feminine, neuter, some kind of expectation along those lines. So the first thing to be disavowed of, it's critical to recognize that the words are not necessarily, and generally just simply aren't, attached to the gender. Okay, the gender of the noun does not tell us something about the meaning. And to give you some examples here, paideon is child, pneuma is spirit. Okay, both of those words, child and spirit, well, you take your guess. What do you expect it to be? You'd probably be tempted to go masculine or feminine. It's personal. These are both neuter. Okay, the body is neuter, soma. Meanwhile, the sea or the word for way, these are feminine. Any kind of exegetical comment that goes something like, okay, this is a masculine noun or this is a feminine noun. And so then you're getting into kind of the meaning of the word based on the grammatical gender. Something like that it's off to a bad start. There are a handful of places in the language where the gender is actually inherent or biological. And so you might have something like, well, a personal name. It's generally, it's going to match the gender. A role, it's going to match generally the gender. And so if you were saying something about that this person had this particular task or this role, oftentimes in English you can do steward, stewardess, waiter, waitress. Oftentimes, but not always, the gender of the expected role will or might, sometimes not, be matched in grammatical gender. Okay, definitely in cases like male, female, husband, wife, sure. See, but again, paideon, child, it's going to be either masculine or feminine, but we're coming out neuter. Okay, so recognize or beware that even here there are complexities. Why then gender? Why do it? Why does it matter? What difference would it make? And I'll show you some examples in a bit of cases where it occurs and it has real and meaningful grammatical significance. For now, what I would just say is, as you have scattered words about within a given sentence, gender is a way of kind of helping put them into at least 3 categories so that your pronoun references will be clear. Okay, so I might refer to 4 items on the table. And so I say, on the table, I'm seeing a wallet, I'm seeing a computer, a pen, I'm seeing a cord, I'm seeing a knife. But that is the one I want. And if only one of the nouns sitting on the table was feminine, and I put the word that in the feminine, you actually know which one I'm referring to. Okay, that's a very simplified kind of case, and we don't really have anything exactly like that in the New Testament. Though we do have some instances I'll show you where the pronoun reference actually is making a bit of a difference. Okay, but like so many language things, the basic reason that you need to know gender is because it's here. It exists, the language did this, and therefore, because it exists, you need to know how to read it and how to work with it. That's probably an effective enough transition into the next thing I want to talk about, and that is to take a second or two to introduce the second declension endings. Okay, when I say second declension, what does that even mean? Well, you learned the first declension, and declension, we'll sometimes say decline. Declension is just a word for the pattern. Okay, so it's something like category 1 or type 1 nouns. And what we're saying by that then is, here, there's a whole set of nouns that use this type of chart, and we'll call them category 1 nouns. Or, well, you want to use a different word for it, feminine nouns, though there is another way to do the feminine that we'll learn later. Okay, here is a category 2 set of nouns. And in this case, they're similar enough that actually we've combined, good news, the category 2 nouns, the second declension nouns, are masculine and neuter. There are similarities and there are differences as we go down them. Okay, so I'll start us out just by learning the endings. I'll notice some similarities or differences across them, and then I'll talk a little bit about how you would work with these or keep them clear in your mind as you proceed. But let's start there. Let's run down the endings. For the masculine endings, what you're going to want to memorize walking down a sidewalk or on your commute, reciting over and over until you're exhausted saying them, and about that time, that's probably perfect, would be this set of endings. So os, u, o, on, oi, own, ois, us. Okay, and as I've said before, I just found myself doing that repeatedly. Os, u, o, on, oi, own, ois, us. You get fast enough of it. I wrote it down on a card initially because I kept on forgetting. But eventually you get fast enough that you really can just say it quickly over and over until your brain's able to grasp it immediately. Os, u, o, on, oi, own, ois, us. Now, I don't know that I ever actually memorized the neuters like that. Because what you'll notice about the neuters is, well, let's go through and recognize some differences. Or I'll start with the similarities actually, sorry. This set right here, u, own, and o, ois, that set of 4, turns out that set is identical to this set over here. Maybe let's try a different color, shall we? So I find that actually this set right here, identical. This whole middle section is an easy learn. You don't have anything to worry about there. You can just copy paste across in your mind and you've got it. Everything's fine. What's going to be a little more complex perhaps is when you get to this top set and this bottom set. Okay, so these 4, there is going to be a difference, but even there, you can memorize it without too much trouble. So if I'm noticing here on the masculine, I have os, oi. On the neuter side, I have on, ah. Okay, now the on has some resonance, I suppose, with the os. The oi has no resonance at all with the ah. They're entirely different. So you could save yourself perhaps a little time, I suppose, if you're recognizing that the on is resonant. What will help you more is once you realize that the on, ah in the neuter nominative are matched by the on, ah in the neuter accusative. This is actually a consistent pattern across the neuter case, neuter gender. The neuter nouns will consistently use the same from the nominative to the accusative so that you're only really memorizing them once. And therefore what it turns out, if you can know this set over here, osu, on, oion, oisius, you can effortlessly derive the other side just by remembering the top row and remembering that this is duplicated down here. And you've just finished really the bulk of the grammatical memorization for chapter 3. This is the core of that lesson. Let me just show you how that implements if I'm actually putting this onto words. So we did this before with the previous set with agape. I'll show you over here. With agape, we took the endings and we just stuck them onto the stem. Agap, and then aes, aen, ion, isos. Similarly over here, let's look first at logos. For logos, I would just take same process. The stem, this by the way is the capital. But I would just take the stem log and I'm adding onto that the endings that we learned above. So os, uo, on, oion, ois, us, I'm sticking that on down here below and I'm getting lagos, lagu, lago, lagon, lagoi, lagon, lagois, lagus. Similarly, when I come over to my neuter paradigm noun, this is the one that we use most often. Similarly, I'm going to do that exact process. I'm going to take the techn, put on the ending. That's my stem, and then I just put on uo, on, a, on, ois, a. Okay, one question I'd like to answer that I didn't sufficiently address in our previous time together was how you would know where to cut it off. In other words, you learn a word like technon, and you're expecting now that I need to be able to put it and implement it into the whole chart. In this case, you've got the chart written out, but you won't normally. So where do I decide to cut my stem? I mean, do I cut it here and put my endings on there? Do I cut my stem somewhere down here? Like, where exactly is the cut going to be? And the same with any of the others. I mean, logos, how would I know where to cut logos? How would I know where to make the cut for agape? To know which part of the stem is going to be now attached to the endings. And here's your key. Your key with all of these, pay attention to that top leftmost square. Here, here, this square. Same over here with technon. Pay attention to the top leftmost square. If you're paying attention to that square, you're recognizing, maybe I should have highlighted instead under the endings. The endings for these, that's the nominative singular. And what you need to know is just that we give you vocab forms always, forever, in the nominative singular. We're always giving you that form that I just highlighted right there. We're giving you the nominative singular form. Okay, how then would I know what is the stem? Well, if I know my endings. I look at on in the nominative singular, I know that this is the nominative singular, and therefore it's a fairly quick step for me to just know, okay, these guys are the endings. Everything else is the stem. Similarly, with logos, I remember my chart, os, uo, on, oi, and oisus. I know that they gave me the vocabulary form in the nominative singular, or the top leftmost square. And so I immediately know that this is the ending. Well, red didn't work, did it? The os is the ending because I remember I memorized my chart, os, uo, on, oi, and oisus. And that tells me that everything else must be my stem. My stem is log. Similarly with agape, I remember my endings, a, ace, a, and ion, isos. I know that the vocabulary form they gave me is always going to be in the nominative singular. That tells me then that the ending is a, and everything else on here, agap, is my stem. Okay, so you can just know out of hand before you even get started into any kind of further analysis, every time we give you a vocab item, that vocab item has come to you in the nominative singular, or said differently, the top leftmost square. That'll come in handy for you with verbs as well. Verbs will work the same way. We will give you the verb in the top leftmost square form. You cut off the endings for that square, that slot, and that's now going to be your stem used for everything else. Okay, one other thing I should finish for understanding how to work with these nouns is that you do need to look at the articles. And I've given you this kind of silly aphorism: the article is my friend, the article never lies. The article is my friend, the article never lies. Say it, remember it, it'll help you, I promise. And the articles here are, like the feminine, derived from the endings you've learned above. Okay, so if you notice, let's do the masculine endings first. If you notice the endings here, os, uo, on, oi, on, ois, us. How would I derive the article? Another word for article, the word the. How would I say the word the? And down here, I'm just going to see the word the is based off of these endings. Okay, pay no attention to the first square because, well, that's the way this works. So the first square we won't worry about. But os, okay, move on. U, o, on, oi, on, ois, us. So the endings are exactly what I learned above. And all I'm really doing to turn these into articles is I'm adding a tau on the front of all of them. Similarly, if I go to the neuter, I've got my u. Let me switch my colors here. U, o, on, ois. I've got that. I've even got the alpha, alpha. And so all I did on all of these cases was I just put on a tau. Stick on a tau, and I essentially have my articles. That said, you noticed already that I skipped some, and so I'm recognizing or acknowledging the existence of some exceptions. And those exceptions are right here. Like the feminine, the masculine nominatives, which are going to be a and oi, don't use the tau. We use a rough breathing mark. And so I have ha and hoi. That should be familiar because with the feminines over here, I learned hey and hi. When I come over to the neuters, I do keep the tau. The difference with the neuter is that I cut off the final letter. Okay, so just for these two spots, instead of ton, I'll get ta. And no idea really why that happened, unless it was perhaps to distinguish us from this, the masculine accusative. That's a possibility. Whether there's not a master planner for languages other than the God who originally gave the languages. But however that worked out, that's just the way that this article will be distinct. It won't have the full ending, just ta. I should have said, as we talked about articles before, if you're working with various nouns in various configurations, if I had, for instance, agapon, my article for that would always match with a gender number case. Remember these? Gender number case. My article will always match with the gender number and case of that noun. Okay, so let's just do another. Let's say we're going to go with tekna, and that's the plural. It could be either nominative or accusative. I don't know currently because I don't have context. But I do know this, that the article would be ta tekna. The article will always match the gender number in case of the noun. That again is why I say the article is your friend. If things get squirrely out here and you start getting confused, this will always remain simple. If you have an article, and most of the time you do, look at the article and it will help you figure out what's going on if other things are getting odd or if other things are a little hard to figure out. If we back up and we go back to our paradigms overall, there are some characteristics that maybe are worth noting that spread across the entire system. So worth noting that agapon, this ending right here, and logon and teknon, those are all the same in the genitive plural and just in the genitive plural. Then the endings are identical. Okay, that would of course pertain to the articles tone, tone, tone. They're all going to be the same there. How would you know then the difference of what's going on? Well, a given noun is always and only in that gender. Agape will always be feminine. You'll never see agape as a masculine. You'll never see it as a neuter. It's always and only feminine. Teknon will always and only be neuter. Okay, so if I encounter teknon, how would I know that it's neuter? Well, maybe you would remember when you memorized it in your vocabulary. But another part of it is, I mean, if you don't know, move on. Do you need to know that it's neuter? Maybe eventually if you're going to be a solid, complete exegete. For now, as long as you can translate it, we continue on. Good enough. Okay, so I have some commonality across those three where all three genders have the same form or the same ending in that one spot. We can recognize, for the sake of memorizing, some slight parallels. So I'll do the endings if you look above the ending instead of the specific words. But if I notice that, for instance, the accusative singular ein right here, we have kind of a on, or we'll just say I have in each one of them a new ending. Okay, so there's something that strikes me as similar to those. I can notice that there's some similarities from the feminine over here, I, to the oi. Certainly this is a big one, we already noticed the identical section of these two. Okay, so being aware of those maybe helps you keep track a little bit as you're doing your memorization. The core of it, and the key thing you need to know from lessons 1 to 3, or excuse me, 2 to 3, you need to have these three charts. These three charts at the top, these have to be memorized cold. You want to be able to sit down with a blank piece of paper, do your matrix, and write them out. Furthermore, you do need to know not just the chart, but you do need to know what the chart means, and it's always written in this order: nominative, genitive, dative, accusative. And from the top, singular versus plural. And what I've talked about earlier in our discussion, how to translate some of these, my recommendation, if you are translating a nominative, make it the subject, a gender, put of, and then your genitive, then your genitive word. So a word like theou is genitive, theos, theou. I'll put of God. And if it's dative, I'll put 2 or 4. And if it's accusative, I'll put it as the direct object. Okay, practice a little bit. So my recommendation, I just gave the word theos. I would encourage you to pause the video at this point, sit down with the word theos, and would you just write out theos in all of its masculine endings. Okay, so go ahead and write out the full matrix. Theos, and go down it. And let's get an example here of just some practice in putting this actually into the proper form. Okay, hopefully you took the time to do that. So let's run down it. And if I was going to, well, how about this? We can save ourselves a little bit of trouble by just copying all down. So let's start with that. I've got theos, and I'll do theos ou. Maybe I'm not saving myself much time at all. Theos, theou, theo, and theon. Okay, os, ou, o, on. Coming across, I'm going to do theoi, theon, theois, and theous. And if I was writing down those to actually translate them, theos would be the subject. So God sent his son. Theou is genitive, so it could be something like the love of theou, the love of God. Theo would be dative. And so I'm going to say, I gave, my love has been given to God. or I did this service for God, and you would stick in the dative. Or if it's direct object accusative, and that's this last, the on, then it would be something like we must love direct object God. And then the plurals across gods in each one of those. Okay, let's do a little practice now coming across with the word, how about we'll do paideon. Paideon, well, I could actually ask you, is that a feminine, masculine, or a neuter? And your answer to that question, I'll pause for a second, is it feminine, masculine, or neuter? That is, remember, when I give you a vocabulary form, the top leftmost square, and the only one that has on in that spot is the neuter. Okay, so this is actually a neuter stem. And I'm going to encourage you to pause for a second. Go ahead and write it out. Let's run down the entire paradigm. And so here's your finished form. And I hope that your result matched this. I'm just going down by D. Well, let's highlight the specific endings. So here are my ending set. And here is my ending set over here. And so on, u, o, on, a, un, ois, a. And I'm just using the neuter across. I'll give you one more, and not any surprise, I'll ask you to do a feminine noun. So take a look at this, take a second, and let's see you write out the feminine forms. And there we are, just magically. There is the complete feminine set. I promised you earlier that we would get an example or two of cases where this actually makes a real world difference in our exegesis. So let me show you a few of these. Here is a key one. It's Ephesians 2:8. And so as you're running through this very familiar, important verse, I'll highlight it over here, and you also see it highlighted at the same time on the other side. For by grace, you are having been saved. I mean, it's called a perfect participle. You have been saved. So for by grace, you have been saved through faith. Now, these are a different kind of feminine. And so if you're looking at them and you're trying to figure out what the ending is and where to place it, don't do that just yet. This is called a third declension noun. It'll come in the future. For now, what you can just know, these are both feminine nouns. So for by grace and by faith, or through faith, both feminine. What follows, and this is from God. It is the gift of God. So how we're working this out, this is not from you. I'm reading ahead. This is not from you. And the key part of this is the word this. The word this, and you can actually look at the bottom of my screen to see it, is a neuter demonstrative pronoun. This is not from you. It is a gift of God. This is a neuter pronoun. The this refers to something up here, wouldn't it? For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from you. This is not your own doing, ESV interprets. Why neuter? Well, here's the trick. It doesn't refer to the grace, and it doesn't refer to the faith. And this is actually an important discussion because there's a little bit of a temptation to say, okay, so the faith is not our doing, or the grace is not our doing. So, maybe someone who would be inclined against a more Calvinist reading might say, well, the faith is mine, but the grace is from God. This is not from you, the grace is not from you, and maybe distinguish it off from the faith. Somebody who wanted to make a point leaning the opposite direction might put a hard emphasis on the faith. The faith is not from you. Which does it refer to? Because it's neuter, it actually refers to the entire package. The best way to read it really is salvation. Kind of pulling away from just the details or the specifics of the nouns to say the whole framework, this whole thing, grace, faith, salvation, the whole thing, it's from you. And that's, I do think, significantly represented in this neuter, what's called a demonstrative pronoun. Let's do another example. This is in 1 John, and this is an important passage because our intent for this course and the next is that you would actually translate 1 John. So let me translate off the first couple of verses, and we'll see what we come up with. What was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we beheld, and our hands handled concerning the word of life. And it will continue on. So here's what I'd like to highlight. What was or ESV over here has said that which was from the beginning. This is also a neuter relative pronoun. It's a neuter pronoun. So something like the thing that was from the beginning, that overstates it. But it has some significance because once I hear the phrase was from the beginning, and especially once I'm reading things like word of life, and we have touched with our hands, I'm really naturally understanding this as the person Jesus. So my growing up, my English reading of this passage was that which, this is Jesus. I think the neuter here is, well, I would expect a masculine for it to refer to Jesus or to a person. The neuter here is not to tell us it's not about Jesus, but I think it has that same function that I just talked about in Ephesians 2. It has the function of kind of generalizing it, making it a little more complete. And so what we would say here is that that which that John is referring to it's the life that we're going to read about a little further down the passage. It's the salvation that Jesus brought us. It's the forgiveness. It's the gospel. And for sure, absolutely, the person Jesus. But also the message which Jesus brought, right? The word of life concept down here. By the way, word is, you know that now, right? Logos, you've learned that. Logou, it's the genitive. And zoe is also a feminine first declension noun, also a genitive. So zo is the stem, zoe, and you can see that this is a genitive singular. You can tell some of that because of the articles. I'm just pointing this out because you actually are starting to achieve the ability to read some of these words now. But concerning the word of life, this is masculine and feminine. That also isn't neuter. It's not exactly matching. The neuter choice here from John is a choice to make it the complete package, the whole thing. Okay, the last thing I'd like to do here is to give you one more example that's really an interesting one. And it's in Matthew 1. This is the genealogy of Jesus Christ. I've read down and I've watched a pattern as you go down through the genealogy, a pattern of the fathers. Okay, and so I get down to here and Jacob, verse 16. Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, from whom was born Jesus, the one called Christ. Okay, I read again. Jacob begat, or Jacob fathered Joseph, the husband of Mary, from whom was begotten, or was born, I should say born, Jesus, the one called Christ. Okay, and the significance here goes that both this born, the relative pronoun, the ace, or hace here, this relative pronoun is feminine. Okay, the significance goes then that as I've watched down the patrilineal line, the fathers, I've gotten to Joseph, the husband of Mary, from whom feminine. Or if I wanted to say it, some translations are probably going to do the husband of Mary, and from her was born Jesus, the one called Christ. This feminine relative pronoun right here is actually a data point defending and supporting the virgin birth. Jesus was born from Mary. Same verb here, born, is the same verb as begotten. Same verb across. And though I have the same verb, it is intentional and it is a bit of a swerve to say that Jesus was not begotten, fathered by Joseph. He was born by Mary. And that change of relative pronouns, it's a change of gender, actually does make the point that we want to make here about the virgin birth. Okay, gender with nouns does matter. It does make a difference, and it does help us as we continue to work with understanding and interpreting the Greek text. That's the end of chapter 3, and we'll continue on in our next lesson with chapters 4 and 5.